My name is Bill Fulton. I've been helping facilitate what's called the Stakeholder Working Group, which you'll get to hear more about tonight. I work with an organization called the Civic Canopy that does community engagement work and tries to help people come together around challenging issues. And this has certainly proven to be a challenging issue, but I hope what we'll have to share tonight is kind of raises the conversation, provides some possibilities going forward, and can bring the community together. We will be meeting until 8 tonight is the time frame, and we have some goals that we want to cover to make sure that by the end of the evening these get met. We wanted to get a chance to explain the history of the process that we're in the middle of, which is locating Strive Prep High School in Northwest Denver. We want to provide an explanation and an update on the work of the Stakeholder Working Group, as well as the current proposals and possibilities that are on the table for where Strive Prep High School might be located. We wanted to get your input and your feedback, questions that you have, things that we need to clarify. And I think most of all to this group of folks that you see in front of you, who I'll introduce in a minute, we wanted to really help set a new tone and build some common ground for supporting all students and schools in Northwest Denver. And we hope that you'll be a part of that tonight. You have, hopefully on your sheet that you picked up, a brief overview of the charge of the Stakeholder Working Group and the resolution that created it. And right underneath that are some working agreements that this group has been working with that I want to bring in the room tonight. It's almost as if this is an expanded meeting of this group. And we found that given the challenge of some of these topics, the depth of passion and energy around it, we've had to kind of work within a framework that calls for that higher ground. We've used these to guide our discussions. We ask folks to state your positions in a way that best respects the views of those who see it differently, which means there's no need to disparage different schools at all. We can talk about what makes each school great and the desire we have to make all schools better. And we hope that you would share the things that have influenced your positions, should you have them, or behind your questions, because it helps build a common understanding of where people are coming from. We should seek out the best options, but we need to be realistic and honest about the timelines that we're working in, the limited resources that we sometimes have. So we're dreaming big and hoping for the best, but we're also working within realistic parameters. And we, at times, need to acknowledge that some of the decisions that we make are driven by some fears and concerns, and addressing those honestly. And then, lastly, we'll explore these options in the current context, but we'll also explore transition plans with a spirit of making any outcome that comes to pass something that works for all students to succeed. And again, we ask you to join in that hope that this is about building a common ground that supports all students in Northwest Denver. I'd like to introduce Mary of the DPS board for a welcome and a context for tonight. Mary, I hope this mic works for you a little bit better than for me.
Can you guys hear me? So as Bill said, my name is Mary Sewell. I'm the president of the Denver Public Schools Board of Education. I know we have some other school board members here, so I want to recognize the two that I've seen and see if others are here as well. Jeannie Kaplan. Jeannie, could you? It's right here. Happy Haynes. And do we have any other board members that are here that I didn't see? Okay, so there's 3 of us, but we're all very in tune, and we're really watching and participating to make sure that the best outcome possible happens. So I'm just going to speak for just a brief second to let you know kind of why we're here right now. And we, in June, as a board, working with different people in Northwest Denver, came to kind of a consensus idea of how to move forward, and it was definitely a compromise, and there were parts that people were not totally sure about, but we wanted to add certainty to this process. And so in June, we really said, Strive High School, replacing the middle school moving to Remington, making sure there was no impact on the classroom space at North, was something that enough of us felt like was a good option. But we also recognized that there was more work that needed to be done and that there could be a better option out there. And we wanted to give room. So we wanted to create certainty, but we wanted to create enough flexibility to bring together a group of people who would really look from both schools in the stakeholder working group. So it was the principals and parents from North High School and the principal and parents and others from Strive. And to say, you know, is there something better? And they've been working exhaustively, they've been meeting, they've been going above and beyond. That was their charge. You know, it wasn't anything bigger, it wasn't anything smaller, and I think what they've done is really incredible. And you're going to hear a lot more about that. So I just wanted to give you that brief background. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your commitment to these schools. I know we have, you know, so many people from North who are here currently, but we have so many parents that are looking to North as their school in the future for their children, and I want to thank you all for being there because, you know, we want both of these schools to succeed, and we have an opportunity right now to make sure that happens. So thank you again for being here.
Great. Before turning it over to Yana Smith from the DPS Community Outreach Office, I wanted to introduce the members of the stakeholder working group who are growing insecure that someone doesn't want me to be talking tonight. Let me introduce the members of the stakeholder working group who were drawn from North High School, Strive Prep High School, and Lake High School, and I'll explain how that came to be in a moment. But let me pass it down here from the end with Claudia.
Hi, my name is Claudia Macias, and I'm a parent of a Lake IB student. And Sorry. My name is Susie Odorisio. I'm the instructional dean at Lake. I'm filling in for our principal who's currently on maternity leave. Hi, I'm Renee Martinez-Stone. I'm a middle schooler at Skinner Middle School. Hello, my name is Maria Sierra, and I am a parent of a freshman here at North High School and an 8th grader at Strive Prep.
Good evening, Chris Gibbons with Strive Prep. Thanks to all of you for coming out tonight and engaging on this conversation.
I'm Emma Valerie. I have a 6th grader at Lake IB. Hello, my name is Raquel Nolanis, and I am the parent of a student at Lake IB. Hi everyone, my name is Suzanne Leff. I'm the parent of a prospective North High School student. She's currently at Skinner Middle School, and I also have a child at Edison Elementary. Hi, I'm Chris Proctor, and I have a student at Lake IB and 2 students at Brown. Welcome everybody. My name is Candace Ortiz. I have an 8th grader at Strive and a 4th grader at Columbian Elementary and a preschooler at Sandoval.
I'm Nicole Valse. I'm the principal here at North High School. We also had 2 other parent representatives representing North High School, Clinton Brown, whose student here is at North High School, and Norma Chavez, who has a student, 10th grade student here at North and a 7th grade student at Strive Prep.
I'm Yana Smith with the Office of Community Engagement, Denver Public Schools. Would you like me to?
Properly introduce Yana. So we know that in this room there's folks that have been working diligently on this issue for months, and others that are coming for the first time saying, what are they talking about? What's going on? This is the first I've heard of it. So we've asked Yana Smith, whose job is really to kind of be the front lines of community outreach for the district, to kind of give a 101 course of the history of how we got to where we are this evening and kind of where we're going forward. So Yana, thanks so much for coming and give us that historical overview.
All right, so I actually would like to start with just getting a read of who's in the room, and that really just helps me to tailor my remarks to the folks in the room. I don't want to go too slow or too fast, but just want to make sure everyone's getting what they need. So how many parents, North parents, do we have here? Thank you for being here tonight. Yes. How many prospective North parents do we have here? Thank you as well. How many Northwest community members do we have here? Very good. Thank you. How many North High School students do we have here? miss, please charge it to my head and not my heart. I just want to make sure my remarks are as succinct and as informative as possible. So I'm with the Office of Community Engagement, and what I really want to do is just take a few moments to take a step back and kind of walk through the timeline and the story of how we even got where we are. So, the Denver Public Schools every year does a process that's called the Call for Quality Schools process. It is essentially a call for proposals for people who want to start new schools in the Denver Public Schools. They can be charter schools, performance schools, innovation schools, number of schools. But there is a process that you must go through to complete effectively an application or a proposal to start a new school. West Denver Prep High School was a school that came forward with a proposal that was ultimately approved by the Board of Education to open in the northwest area. We began community conversations, in fact, in May of the spring. So May 16th, 2012 was the first time that the Office of Community Engagement came out to the Northwest community to talk about the approval of this West Denver Prep High School and ultimately where would that school be placed within the Northwest community. As part of those options, one particular placement that has brought us all here together was a recommendation that West Denver Prep High School would share a campus with North High School. We held those meetings May 16th and again on May 30th. Those meetings were publicized via robocalls, emails, infinite campus notifications to sort of those feeder schools and community members and parents around North. I would say we had between 200 to 300 people at those meetings. I know we were falling outside of the doors at Smedley where those meetings were held. So they were well-attended meetings. I think we also did not have every single voice that we needed represented in the room at the time. As a result of the 16th meeting and the May 13th meeting, where we really talked about, okay, besides North High School, what other viable options exist? Still allowing West Denver Prep High School to open in the Northwest community, but where else could they possibly locate their school? So those were two community meetings in which we threw an abundance of options out on the table. From private facilities, to them purchasing their own facility, to them sharing a campus here at North, to us looking at currently closed district facilities, everything was on the table. What we then did was took that input from those community meetings and we basically started saying, let's look at the viability of this. That leads to a list of things that work and things that don't work. An example of something that might not work is a particular building that we may be considering for them to locate in may not be big enough for them once they reach full enrollment. Or a building that's located far outside of where their preferred, location would be, or where they're drawing their students, parents, and families from, may not be seen as the most viable options. Ultimately, what resulted in that was a set of recommendations that were made to the Board of Education. At that time, the board did not feel that enough options, alternatives, time for community conversation, additional time for community process had taken place. So it was then decided by the Board of Education that we would convene the stakeholder working group. Something I want to clarify for you. I have been referring to West Denver Prep as West Denver Prep. In the summer of 2012, West Denver Prep underwent a name change. They are now Strive Prep. So if you've heard those two schools used interchangeably, they used to be West Denver Prep. They're now referred to as Strive Prep. So where we are today is with a set of community members, representatives from each of the schools who have really been spending time working together. I would actually give you all a huge round of applause. For just your time and your commitment to not only your schools, your kids, but all kids in the Northwest community, and really coming together to try to come up with solutions. Not easy. I think we all enter the room with a certain sense of what our personal preference is. We all come into a space with a sense of what we think would be best. And this is a group representing many of the schools, that have been surrounding these conversations, trying to come up with a set of viable options and solutions. I will let you know that in the absence of another viable option coming forward, the default recommendation will be upheld, and that is that Strive High School will share the 1913 building here at North, with common spaces to be negotiated between school leaders. Common spaces are spaces such as the cafeteria, the auditorium, or field space. So I just want to pause and just try to check for clarification and make sure, did I leave anything out? If I have, please feel free to add it. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Bill, who has been really leading and facilitating the conversations of the stakeholder working group, and he'll be able to go into a lot more detail about what those conversations have been and sort of what the recommendations coming forward are. Thank you.
Thank you, Yana. I think I clipped my phone into my shirt. So hopefully you have a copy of this sheet of paper on it, and I apologize if we didn't have enough for the capacity crowd here in the auditorium, but maybe you can look off of your neighbors if you don't have it. And to pick up where Yana left off, is the charge for the stakeholder working group is outlined from that resolution of the board on the 18th of June, which is a stakeholder working group, or we'll call them the SWG, throughout the evening, will be developed to come forward with recommendations for an acceptable alternate location for the placement of West Denver Prep High School or Strive Prep High School. In the event the stakeholder working group does not come to consensus on an acceptable alternate location, as Connor mentioned, Strive Prep High School will be located in the North Campus in the 1913 building with those shared spaces. So one common misconception that it would be sharing the entire building. It's located in the current building occupied by the West Denver Prep, or Strive Prep Middle School. So it is a kind of a limited aspect of the building campus. So there's a default solution that kicks in if the stakeholder working group wasn't able to reach consensus on a viable alternative, which this group took extremely seriously, that was the common goal, is to find something that was a viable alternative. And so the first round of the stakeholder working group's life was spent vetting, beginning with about 15 or 20 different options, every conceivable thing. Let's not rule anything out. You have on this sheet as well the criteria that the group kind of came up with to vet what makes a viable option. You'll see things like it provides adequate space, it strengthens the full feeder path, distributes schools to make them most accessible to students, provides potential common ground for community buy-in, is financially feasible, provides a sustainable solution, so we're not, as much as we've come to love each other, we don't want to meet together next year. That's got to be sustainable and lasting. And promotes the success of all schools and programs in the region. They filtered that list of 15 or so down to about 4 or 5, which in the final meeting ended up with 3 that made it to the board presentation. After the board looked over those options, one of those options remained as a potentially viable one. That was the idea of locating Strive Prep High School at Lake, finding a new building for the Strive Prep Middle School that would be somewhere in the southwest region of the quadrant, and locating Strive Prep Lake Middle School there. The logic being there's a huge demand for middle school students in that southwest area. Strive Prep was Strive was already at the Lake building. This would be kind of using that space and thinking that might open up new options and be a viable alternative. We quickly realized that after the board said, okay, we need some more time to vet whether that could work. Are there any potential buildings? Let's give this process another little kind of extension. In meeting with the Lake community, the response was strong. Locating a high school at Lake is not going to work for a list of reasons the length of my arm. However, it became very clear that, well, if you keep Strive Prep Lake Middle School in its place, they've worked hard to co-locate there for 3 years and it's working well now. It could be the high school that finds an alternate site. And so, although a slightly challenging process for the Lake community to come to those terms, thankfully it included their membership on this stage of the stakeholder working groups process to get their viewpoint, and they've been an incredible addition to the conversations. So we quickly remodeled that one to say, all right, are there any buildings available for Strive Prep High School in the Northwest Quadrant? They could have their own building that it would work for all these reasons. The working group vetted those opportunities, and as we currently meet tonight, the possibilities do include 2 additional privately held buildings in Northwest Denver. That because they are privately held and in the vetting process of their viability, anyone who knows anything about real estate acquisition deals, it's difficult to talk publicly about the deals of those real estate negotiations. So what we have on the table tonight are 2 potential sites in Northwest Denver for Strive Prep High School to be located in that wouldn't be here on the North Campus, and that within that. Feeling the love, that was the kind of hope. And that we acknowledge it's a little shaky to say, we've got these 2 options, we can't tell you much about them. What we hope you'll be willing to entertain with us is that in the spirit of good faith negotiations, the more you talk about those kinds of things publicly in detail, the less likely they are to become successful options. So to kind of draw a box around them to say, we vetted them with the district is deeply committed to exploring those and pursuing those. The members of the stakeholder working group from multiple perspectives have looked at them and said, while we haven't reached consensus that they would be the best option, they are certainly viable options to keep the conversation to go, to find out more information about how they work out. And we think that's been a huge accomplishment of the persistence of adapting the process, the district stepping up to really pursue those hours and hours from the staff to do the workups, to find buildings, to look everywhere. So it is a huge contribution for the course of the conversation. If you look at the working agreements, you know that we're also realistic. These are not foolproof. We still have the possibility that they won't work out, that we will need to explore either the default or the one remaining option of Remington being a potential site for strike. In all candor, we know that both of those present challenges. We know that there's more conversations to have about those. But we feel like we can stand here in front of you tonight saying that there is options that weren't there back in June. They are very viable and very compelling and could turn out to be exactly the kind of winning possibility to get the community a chance to move together and support each school going forward. And we can work knowing that whatever the outcome is, the kind of connections and conversations and commitment to making all schools succeed has grown through both the stakeholder working group and the involvement of people like you. So the last thing I think I want to say to bring I guess the last thing I would like to say, we know that this is the first chance at North to have this conversation. There's a lot to cover in what we've already talked about, the history. We know that many of you probably have a lot of questions about what co-location would look like, how would that get managed, and we're trying to find the balance of, there's probably an extended conversation should that prove to be the default option if that kicks in, where those conversations would have lots of detail around them. At this juncture, the pursuit of those 2 alternate sites is the kind of premier hope for the group, and that's the one that the stakeholder working group is kind of pursuing the first line of opportunity. So this isn't your only chance to kind of have involvement in the ongoing conversations about whatever the next steps will be. I mean, look down the line, see if there's anything I've forgotten or folks that want to add in, and then on just the facts of the matter. Then I think we're going to just give a few more minutes of kind of the context from the stakeholder working group and what has kind of happened once a small group of folks from diverse perspectives get a chance to have these conversations under very different conditions than the way we usually work out issues when we're divided. The general strategy, and having all of us just been through an election, you kind of know this game by heart. You mobilize the troops, you fine-tune your message, you kind of think about the opponent's weakest positions and go after it and don't give up. That's sometimes necessary, but it certainly makes it difficult for a community to come together. The rules of the stakeholder group have been different. It's been about listening and understanding the diversity of perspectives, honoring the fact that each of us can choose a school that best meets our child's needs, and that we can find ways for all of those to succeed together. And to imagine a Northwest region of Denver fully united around everybody having the best for their kids and working together to make sure that we can provide that for everyone. And that's been a powerful process to watch that unfold. And I know it's always hard to be the first voice in the room, but I guess I would turn it to any comments from the stakeholder working group of your hopes for this process or other things that have occurred during your work together.
Let the North representative speak.
So yeah, I want to say it has actually been a real pleasure to work with this group. First, just with the North and Feeder North and Strive Prep families throughout the summer, and then with the addition of our Lake families. Has been really a good working group where we've been able to challenge each other's thinking, respect each other's perspectives, and really think at a larger scale of what's best for Northwest Denver. We want to make sure that all schools succeed here in Northwest Denver and set the most optimal conditions for each of our schools to be successful. So that is something that we all held in common. We do have these preferred possible locations, which we are excited to continue to vet, and hopefully one of those will end up being one of the possibilities. We also are realistic that things can happen. And if either of those don't pan out, which is a possibility, hopefully a less likely possibility, but if it does, then we know that we will be challenged to have a tougher conversation. Regardless of the outcome, we need to make sure that we make this work for all Northwest Denver and think about some of our larger issues to ensure that we are serving all of our kids in an equitable way, no matter where they are at school. And so to really keep our focus on equity for our kids and conditions for all kids so that they are successful. And those are the premises from which we need to continue to have these conversations, regardless of where location ends up being.
One thing that as a group was unfaltering through the whole process was the value in a good education for all Northwest children, and understanding that each child is going to learn differently, so different schools are going to meet different children's needs, and not to say one is better than the other, because if you're meeting a need, you're doing your best, and so we recognize that. The other thing is to make a school improve. So a lot of people in this audience that I'm looking around and seeing have been part of the turnaround school process. Whatever the decision ultimately is, if every single person in this room gives time and effort to whatever school they choose to, you will make that school a success, because it is the people in this room talking to their neighbors, getting everyone involved in their kids' education that will make each and every school in Northwest Denver a success. So it's not just about us up here spending our time and our energy. We're going to put some of it back on you, saying as a Northwest Denver community, whatever school you send your child to, take the time to participate in the processes that those schools ask you to participate in. Let your voice be heard, and your school will be the best.
I just want to add, I think Nicole and our parent from Lake represented it pretty well, but I just want to add that what I hope for out of this meeting is that people take at least an adjustment in their stance. There needs to be no aggressive stance, in the sense that, like she said, there's no us versus them, it's about educating. I clearly represent that my kids are being educated in both educational institutions, and I support both my children in those processes. So in the last community meeting, you know, I got pretty emotional as a parent, and this process has been emotional. It's been a difficult process, but our commitment is for these kids in this community, in the community I grew up in the community that most of you have and are a part of right now. So I just would hope that when we leave out of here today, that we take, at least try to take one point that's different from your perspective. Because there are siblings just besides my two children that attend both schools. There are lots of siblings that attend both, so there's lots of parents whose investments are in both schools. And like she said, I would hope that after this meeting that we support both schools to the best of our ability. I already see things that I want to help support through the North process, and I fully intend to do that, as well as still be a parent and a Strive student. I think it's very important for you guys to know that in this decision making, we not only looked at what was best for the Strive students, we also took a real deep look at, no matter where they are going to be placed, how is that going to affect whoever is there now? How is it going to affect the community that's there? How is this going to affect transportation? How is this going to affect boundaries? We took into depth so much stuff that I don't think was really looked at for the first meeting. When we left, we had such a new eye-opening experience on how hard this actually is, that I would just like you guys to understand and appreciate, no matter what decision is made, every possible angle was viewed more than 10 times, bounced back and forth, and everyone had their say-so in it, and we looked at the best for the community and the children. It wasn't at which school, or which school was better than the other. What is best for the community? What is best for the children? How do we get the children to this school? How do we get the children that are already in school, keep them going on the route that they are? I know the collaboration is very hard, and we took into consideration if we are to switch different grades, how does that affect people? So being that we have so many people on this committee, brought in different views from everywhere. So please know, nobody's voice went unheard.
So it's time to let everybody is. Senator, we want to know your questions, your thoughts, input on the process. There's a gentleman in the back.
You have a record of your proceedings. You talk a lot of nice topics. You have minutes of your proceedings. You have stuff that could be examined instead of a nice topical overview. Do you have anything that can be examined closely by professionals besides what you're not professionals, you're good parents, you love your children, we love our children. Do you have anything on the record of your meetings, like keeping notes, someone that was secretary so that this stuff can be viewed? And then
So, as I understand the question, is there records of the meetings and proceedings?
Yeah, records of your meetings.
So we
Written
do.
records of your meetings. Do you
Yeah,
have
so
them?
we do, and the spirit of this group is slightly different than one that is, the way processes like these are often set up. We do have those records of the kind of,
the administrative process would be different than what we have now.
yeah, I'm sorry, so I'm trying to answer your question.
I'm asking you, do you have a record, an administrative record of these so-called proceedings that we can appreciate and study?
Right,
So that we can participate.
Excuse me, sir, I'm trying to answer your question. Let me respond to both the tone and the content. I hear a sense of frustration in the tone to want to be able to make it more visible.
Thank you.
So, and then secondly, just to answer the content of it, the record of the first set of recommendations is posted on the website. The minutes of those meetings were kind of internally shared. Stage one, the challenge of this type of a small group meeting is when you're looking at options that will potentially affect a number of folks in the community. To vet them properly, you have to be able to kind of take on options that may or may never become viable. And if vetted under the conditions of kind of full public review, raises concerns before they're even viable.
Raises concerns like due process.
So, again, let me be sure to answer your question, sir.
Do you or don't you have a record of your
Yeah.
proceedings that you can distribute?
Yeah, no, there was actually a report that was submitted in September to the board that had all the details of what was discussed in the stakeholder work group from June through September. Full report with the data, what options were looked at, what the criteria was, all of the details of the stakeholder work group for June through September was presented in a report to the board, which is public.
And what's the website for that? Just go to the board and they'll hand it out to you?
The board, it is submitted to the board. I'll find it and send it to you. It's on the board website, DPS board, and then okay, so if you go to the date of that September 19th around meeting, there's the document of the full report that has all the discussions, the data, the criteria, etc.
And that report wasn't distributed other than we now have to go find it, and then when we find it and read it, we can have another discussion with you. Is that how this is going to work?
So, I couldn't hear everything, but,
Once
sorry.
we have an opportunity to absorb these recorded proceedings, then can we participate?
Okay. So I will actually put it up on the North High website tomorrow as well, so that's easily accessible.
So we'll coordinate with you on that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you,
No
sir.
problem.
So we'll coordinate with you on that, Nicole, so that you can get that information posted on your website as well. So let's take another question over here, all the way far right in the black shirt.
Do we have another roving like two? I thought we had three.
We did have three, one
Yeah, if you belt it out, we'll just do it.
What, if anything, is in place to prevent whoever makes this decision, say for Strive, what's to prevent them from just not digging in their heels and saying no to everything just because this is what they want? This is your option. You made it the default option. So what safeties or anything is there to prevent that from happening? And then just say no to everything.
It's no one saying, the only person who is saying no is the Board of Education saying yes or no. This group is going to come to consensus on an option, and hopefully only one option, and we will propose that to the board. It will be the board's decision to say, yes, we accept your recommendation, or no. So it won't be up to any particular school, it won't be up to me, it won't be up to it won't even be up to this work group. This work group will try and make the best proposal possible, but the board will be the ones who decide yes or no.
Okay. Firstly, I'd like to say that the terminology has been a farce from the beginning. For DPS to say that the default school is North High School is a load of crap, because it's already rejected. We didn't have a different school to fall back on the case committee at North High School. It was actually the objective. So I'm dissatisfied with that language. The other thing too is, I don't know if the DPS school board is ever going to address the fact that they bought a school for $8 million and they're not showing their fiduciary responsibility for taking that money that they threw down the drain so eagerly to buy Lutheran, and they've shown a bad track record of throwing their money away when they want to and then trying to jam Strive in here. Mine is the exact question that she had. What accountability will the school board show that they haven't shown to this point?
Due process.
And maybe you can answer that.
So let me just,
Simply put, it's just that you guys have put in the work. You've attempted to kind of bring it all together in possibly at this point about 3 scenarios of what will or won't happen. Give your recommendation to the school board. The school board has no track record whatsoever because you're building a community. Everybody here in the Northwest community is standing together to try and find a solution. But the one thing I've yet to hear is that the school board will actually listen to the community.
So and then I'll refer to Susanna. The fact that board members are here they have been deeply involved throughout these conversations. So if we go back to the meetings in May, board members have been present at each of those meetings. The Northwest representative, Arturo Jimenez, has also been present at those meetings. I mean, so they've been involved. Everyone is deeply invested in making a decision that is best for students. That's not to be questioned. It's not to be questioned.
So let me just.
But I do think it warrants saying that the board members have been involved in these discussions throughout the entire process.
So let me just.
Okay,
Yeah.
So I'm not a board member. I'm not patting myself on the back. But here's, okay. So I don't represent the board. Okay, so here's the deal. So here's the deal. There are a number of people here tonight that have questions. You have heard the SWG say we need to start moving towards solutions. We are all committed, these folks have committed their time to coming up with viable options and solutions.
It's a fait accompli.
And so we've got to be respectful, one as adults, two as the example that we're setting for the children in the room. So we can ask questions, but we are also setting an example for students. Yes.
And I'm going to answer your question.
Go ahead.
Recourse in the event that you guys simply do what you initially intended, which is not the fault, but the objective of putting Strive in here at North.
Okay, so 2 points. One, we wanted to be really clear in that resolution, you know, that we wanted that on the table. Like we wanted to be transparent in that way. But let me get to the heart of what you're saying. This is not a fait accompli. You know, I really believe that we're going to figure this out, and we're just not quite there yet. I will absolutely, if this group comes to consensus and they say here's a viable alternate location and it comes forward to the board, I feel very comfortable in supporting that. Now there's a lot of unknowns, but that's where I am, and there is accountability. You know, there's accountability for every board member, and so you have that as voters, but that's what we're working towards, and they're working in good faith. I believe in the work they've done that's better than any work I've seen come out of a community process before, and I really think we're going to get there.
All right, so we have a question here. Yes, ma'am.
Actually, did you want to?
Okay, so my name is Anita. Lots of different hats I wear. Student in a charter school, teacher of a public school, husband of a charter school, child of a Denver traditional high school. So I wear a lot of different hats. My perspective is that we're very intertwined. Our stories are very intertwined. I do feel a little uncomfortable about the scaffold that we set up for us to have true integration and not selected segregation. You know, North High has really strong history of just being passionate people. Not saying that you work, nor that you're not North High. My question, with that perspective, we're intertwined, we're shared. I want to make sure that people feel a sense of belonging. Because way before any academic things happen, people need to feel safe and strong and secure. Strive being, as I understand it, a choice school. Is it or isn't it? Okay, so with that being what it is, I'm curious why the boundaries are even being looked upon. Knowing that I have a child that I have to drive because I choose that. I have another child who chose a public school. I choose that. So I don't understand why some of these conversations are coming to be when there are, I still see as possibilities at the Remington. I have one more question. My question is, Strive has a boundary, correct? Or no boundaries?
The middle schools do.
Okay, the high school will or will not?
The high school will not.
Okay, so if North High is full, can kids then be put into Strive and vice versa?
So each school that is a choice school in Denver Public Schools has a certain criteria of priority, and this is for any school in Denver Public Schools that is a choice school. It kind of goes back to your original question of why, you asked the question of why are areas and locations looked at if it is a choice scenario. I think one of the things, out of respect for all families in Northwest Denver, we want to find the best for all families. It doesn't mean it's going to be a determiner of a location. We have certainly engaged in a very similar conversation that you're bringing up, and I'd say that conversation is still on the table, that we're weighing in that. And we are weighing those very issues. If this is a choice school, what does that mean for transportation? How do we make it easier on the majority of families, regardless of which school you're from? If we can come up with a win-win situation for all, that is our goal. If we can't, then yes, the choice process is the choice process at what it is, and therefore that is why Remington is on the table. Still, it is not necessarily where we are in consensus with at this time, but it is still on the option list for our stakeholder work group.
All right, so we have a question here.
Yep.
So we have a lot of questions. I'm going to come back on that side, but I do want to make sure that we're hearing from as many people as possible.
Real quick, I just want to also acknowledge you can feel the kind of temperature rising in the room and that pit in your stomach of, oh, here we go again. I want to put out a call that I think the stakeholder working group found early on. We know where conversations end when our sole purpose is to make sure we get the knife in, we make the point, and we make sure someone that's caused our frustration has equal pain. We know that story. I want to totally acknowledge that this process has unfolded in ways that not everybody had the information that they needed at the time. It's imperfect. We are far from perfect as a small group of folks wrestling with these things. But I don't want to lose sight of the fact that on the table are a couple of options that can bypass some of the concerns people have. The success of those options hinges entirely on the degree to which the community come together and make them work to a certain degree. So I would say, as much as we want to hear and get input and understand the frustrations you've experienced, we'd also invite you to take that step to say, how do we work towards a solution that can work for all folks? So just invite you to that approach. Thanks, Helen.
I'd like to second that, and I'd like to take up Dr. Cornell West's idea that I think this community at this point is wounded. And what Dr. West reminds us is not to be a wounded herder, but a wounded healer. And with that in mind, I would like to actually address this to the school board members who are here today. One of the things that so troubles me about this process is the fact that if we look here, I am so pleased to see all these North students here fighting for their school.
And the alumni.
I appreciate that, but I want to focus particularly on the kids as it relates to this process. One of the things that I see that's very hurtful as a community member who I do want to send my kid to North High School. However, the process here is what I see is that we have politicized our youth in a way that is not comfortable. We have backed them into a corner where they have to engage in this type of democratic activism through fear and cynicism, and not through a hope or a true felt difficulty. As a college professor, I can tell you the hardest thing you teachers write, the hardest thing is not to teach my students how to write sentences coherently, to string those into paragraphs, to string those paragraphs into beautiful essays, but rather to be able to let go of the cynicism, to be able to let go of easy answers that are either for us or against us. And this process made me sad in that fact. So I would ask you, as Mr. Boasberg, members of the school board who are here today, what healing processes are you willing to engage these students and these parents in? Thank you, stakeholder working group. First of all, everybody's busy. I recognize you put in a lot of time and effort.
I have a question about the criteria, which I agree with. Criteria provides adequate space for the students, provides a sustainable solution. I don't see that as being possible with Strive going into North High School. Let me tell you specifically what I'm talking about. If I understand it, there's room for 350 students, and Strive will have 500 students. How is that providing accurate space? And how is that a long-term solution? Also recognizing that the population of kids that will be attending high school in Northwest Denver is exploding. And to me, it seems like these are good criteria to have, but in the end, you're saying, you know, if we just can't find another way, it's going to North. And it wouldn't be going to North because it makes sense to go to North, Strive would be going to North because you're saying there's no other option, and to me, that's a bad policy. If it doesn't make sense, it doesn't make sense. Don't create another problem. Has anybody thought about, and can you explain how both schools would use the cafeteria, the library, the gyms, the fields, all of the different facilities in the school when the students are not going to commingle? To me, there's a lot of serious questions, and to simply just say, well, there's no other option, so North is a default, is a horrible policy. Thank you.
Yeah, well, let's take a few more questions, but I think you raised a question of how much we want to try to respond to each one's.
People are asking questions, but there's no answer.
Yeah, so
actually from us, you're saying a lot of the same questions that I know I'm personally raising, that many of our stakeholder work group is raising, and so we're taking note and validating a lot of the questions that we're hearing. For us, it's important that the board that is here is listening to these questions. I am not going to be able to answer that for you. I'm sorry, tonight I won't be able to answer that for you. But we are definitely taking these things, because as we go back to the table, if we have to come to any other kinds of decisions, we really need to make sure we're taking these exact questions that you're asking to our discussion.
yeah, so let's.
So we have, so can I make an observation? Bill, to your point about frustration in the room, we want to get to as many questions that you all have as possible. And I recognize in the absence of that, you all will shout your questions out, but we've got to do things decently and as in much order as possible to get to as many questions. So I'm going to ask, when you state your question, if we can state it a bit more succinctly, but also when we respond to, can we respond a bit more succinctly so that we can get to as many as possible? So we have some students who would like to make some statements as well.
We have a comment up here with the student. Yana, we have a comment up here with the student.
Okay, so.
You'll be next.
Okay, so I'm a North High student, and I've been fighting this for a while now. I've been fighting this since forever because I've had this go through me already. This has happened to me since 6th grade. And I personally don't think this is right, because you're not hearing the students' voices for anything right now.
Go back to Jan and then some quick responses here.
I'm a North student, and also.
Give us a mic. Oh, I'm fine. No, Alex, I want you to come on.
Yes, Principal Valdez.
Okay, so I'm a North High student. I'm also a former student at Ms. Valdez at Skinner Middle School. But she's barely come, and this is her 2nd year here. Should we allow her to give the chance to grow North even more? To prove that all of that, have you guys even thought about how the students will react? Have you put yourselves in the students' shoes about what will happen every single time? If we can't commingle, there's going to be a problem. That's all I have to say. So
Maybe we'll take 3 or 4 questions and then just to acknowledge responses. So the space issue, there are diagrams that map out the thing. So it depends on people's viewpoint of it, but the staff has worked diligently to figure out how to make it fit in that footprint. Taking the students' view into account, we need to do a better job, but you're a great start, and we have steps to kind of gather some of that input. So thank you for being here today.
It's working right now. Strive is located right now in this facility. And as far as the, wait, I want to try to answer as best as we can. Okay, it is true. That's part of why this is a difficult process. Okay.
So
let me just answer the question. I'm trying to answer the question.
Let's let her finish.
I just want to say, that is something that's always on the table. Obviously, the community has been given misinformation, and that's why we are committed tonight to give the right information and answer the questions. It's not about, we're not going to commingle, and remember, North is not a primary option, okay? This stakeholder group is committed to looking at other options. That's what we're currently doing. We started out with a very long list and worked with it through this criteria, and I think the focus has been, for very good reason, from the North community, that we're just going to come as Strive and take space that is already being utilized. That is not the case, and clearly principals, community members will have to come to the table if it falls to the default. There's not going to be a situation where kids are being taken over other classrooms. It's not that situation, and I want to apologize, and I wasn't even part of the process in the beginning to misinform the community. I am a North parent. My daughter comes to North. So I'm a parent who represents both. And I just want you guys to know that every one of these stakeholder group people brings the issues of the community. That is why we are working hard to come to consensus. And I just want you guys to know that we're always bringing it to the table. And so I appreciate the comments of the students, and I just want you guys to know that.
So currently, we have our Strive Middle School is in the 1913 building, and that's it. If one of the things that, in recognizing the information that the gentleman stated, in May and June, this issue was brought up and is a very real issue. And therefore, because we knew it would not, 500 student high school would not fit in the 1913 building. So in the June resolution, it clearly states that there would be buildings built adjacent to or next to, for example, 4 science labs or any needed additional classrooms for the Strive Prep High School if we come to that solution, so that they do have sufficient space. And so that's what would happen, because we knew that the current state would not fit. And so the board committed to that in that June resolution, to adding additional portables or whatever they call them. Yeah.
The second point to that is that it also says in the resolution, I think your point was, if North grows in size, the resolution allows for Strive that North would reclaim that space. So I also just want to acknowledge we're kind of playing by 2 sets of rules. Some folks that are raising their hands and some folks are calling out. Let's number off if we can. Ramon on your side and on your side, we get a cue so
yes.
folks know where they stand.
I have 1, 2, 3, 4.
Okay, great. And Ramon, if you want to do a...
Let's just do 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then 13 in the back.
So remember your number, we'll cruise through those.
All right, so we have a...
All right, so let's go, Jan.
Okay, so I have quite a bit of a history from Denver West Prep. I formerly went to Lake Middle School and had fought against Denver West Prep taking over the entire building. And I am currently a student here at North High School. And I kind of want to follow your criteria as into pulling in a solution. I came here as a freshman and we were located at the Smedley campus. And to my understanding, it is not currently occupied. Could Strive take their high school there?
Yes, so the report that the gentleman asked about before, that was initially one of the options. It proved to be too small in the zoning around in the parking lot, but it's understandable to raise that. It is an empty building. but it isn't viable by the criteria.
All right.
Two.
The only question I have is, and maybe I'm naive, but I thought if you want to start a school, shouldn't you have the building first before you start the school?
It is a fair and frequent question. We've thought about ways to communicate with DPS about that. There are other challenges of needing the location before approving the school. You can see what happens when you talk about locating new schools in general. So it's difficult to, there's no easy way through that, but acknowledge that, and it's definitely a conversation that needs to happen after this process. Number 3.
Okay, first off, I'd like to say that at any school here, I am an alumni and a proud for high school. And one of the things about North that I love, I graduated in '67, okay? I'm 63 years old. I graduated from North. One of the things I loved about this school is that there was no busing at that time, but they wouldn't have had to bus here because we all got along. And I see what you're doing to the kids, and you say they're your priority. You're polarizing them, and that is not a good thing. You have parents who have chosen, for whatever reason, and I've done it before with my own kids. I chose to send them to magnet schools in Chicago because the school system sucked. They're really bad. But you have chosen to take your kids out of North Denver High School. And I don't see what moving you back in here without bringing you in as North High Vikings for these kids or for your own children. You do need to either bring them in to North High School and Strive High School, or go someplace else that's more suitable where you won't have conflict with the students.
I echo your sentiments. I am an alum, class of '79. My father, Harold Kadovitz, came to this school, graduated in 1939. My father, my uncle, my aunt, my brother, we all came here. We need to coexist. We're hearing about commingling, making it work. I don't have a dog in this fight. I don't have children in our public schools. I'm proud of this school, this community. I moved back to this community 6 years ago. I live in my family home that I grew up in. I'm very proud of that. There's something I want to say about commingling, and this is a challenge that Strive has. I live at 20th and Lowell, near Strive School at Lake Junior High, as it was called when I lived there. We've had 2 community meetings, not community meetings, but meetings with the Strive staff, DPS, and the neighborhood, discussing the impact that Strive has had on the residents of the neighborhood. Now, it might seem inconsequential. We've had problems and issues with parking by the teachers of Strive who refuse to use the provided parking at the school. We had a meeting. They said there's only 85 spots for that school building. It wasn't built for high school, by the way, for more cars. But I challenge you, you go to Lake Junior High on the south side of the building, and those parking lots are half empty because not every teacher of Strive or Lake or staff drives to work or they carpool. They do not all use that parking lot. And it sounds inconsequential, but here's the problem. We have said to Strive, could you please quit polluting up our streets? Quit. Yeah, you can legally park on the streets. It's all legal. You have a right to be there. So it's about our neighborhood tranquility, And also when you block the street off at 19th and Mead with your cones, which you've been told by the city that you can't do it. It's about co-mingling with the community. So what I'm saying is this. Strive, God bless you, you've been successful in everything. But when we as a community come to you at Strive at Lake Junior High and say, could you please tell all your teachers to park in the parking lot? Could you please not block the streets off? You're not listening to the community as well. We have to coexist, and it's the only simple thing we're asking for. We gotta coexist, but when you refuse to listen to us, you're not coexisting and being a good neighbor.
I don't want to diminish the legitimacy of parking concerns, but I just want to pause one time again. When we start using the language of you and they and the other, throughout our history, very few good things come after that. Talking about people different than ourselves in that type of tone, I think we need to be careful. The pride that I think was just expressed about North High School, we want to see that. Parents who send their children to Strive and to Lake feel equally proud of that school for their children. And I think the challenge we have before us is how do we allow that space for others to be different and all of us still to work together. So again, I know that it's hard to bear the frustration and the feeling that things haven't gone the way you wanted them. To elevate that conversation to say, we are proposing solutions tonight that can unite and bring the community together. Let's not undo that as we try to sort this out. Kristen.
Good evening. First of all, I would like to thank all of you who have invested time away from your families, your children, your jobs, and I really just can't even imagine what you went through, so really thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you for the board members who have taken the time to come this evening and listen to the community. I have been at a lot of these community meetings. I have had conversations with a lot of the board members and had conversations with Tom as well. And it seems to me that we keep having these community meetings and trying to give the community an opportunity to get answers. And all of the questions that have gone around this room don't seem to be getting answered. And I've asked them. I've asked them to Tom personally. I've asked them to several of the board members and probably have gotten a response back from Jeannie and Arturo and Happy and Ann, but it just really seems that the other board members that are voting on these issues haven't even taken the time to come to hear from the community and what's being said. And you're giving an opportunity for folks to ask questions, but you're continuing to pass the microphone and you're not addressing the questions. And there are board members here and our superintendents here. And I think that it would really be appreciated from the community if we could stop and get some answers, because I know we all have children, we all have jobs, and we need answers. We've asked the questions repeatedly and now it's time for answers. My second point is that you're talking about the SWG has obtained some community input, and I am on the board for Sunnyside United Neighbors, and I've engaged the board and appreciate Mary's time in helping us try to reopen Smedley. There's another Sunny board member here with me this evening, and we're not opposed to the use of Remington. And Smedley, we need the capacity for Smedley for elementary school, and I'm just saying, nobody's approached our board to discuss this, so when there's talk about engaging the community, I'm not really sure at what capacity that's being done, because the Sunny board has actively engaged DPS about the usage of our buildings, and we welcome Strive into our neighborhood to use Remington. So I think we really need to reevaluate some things, and I'm sorry, the last point I want to make, we've talked a couple times, a couple DPS staff members have talked about setting an example for the children here this evening, and I actually think that it's okay to have conflict and to do it respectfully, but what we're teaching our kids throughout this whole Strive North High School process is we should be, sorry DPS, but you should be ashamed at yourselves because you're not providing the children answers. And it's okay to question authority, but these kids, they need answers, and I would really appreciate if somebody could answer the gentleman's question up there about how we're going to make this right for the kids, because at the end of the day, this is about the kids. This isn't about a building or outsourcing our education, even though that's not to be insulting, but Our job as parents is to do the best thing possible for our children, and we count on DPS, our tax money, board members, Tom, to be accountable for the things that you're doing to our community.
My question is, to clarify, where will Strive Middle School go if the other two options on the table of Remington and this land acquisition, where would it be for both middle school and high school for Strive?
The new building would just be for the high school. And so the middle schools would stay where they currently are.
And who is going to pay for the land acquisition? Because historically, charter schools have purchased their own buildings, paid for their own renovations. Who will be paying for that? Has that been discussed?
Yeah, so the district is committed to that. The examples, I mean, how charter schools are accommodated in the district is it's a variable. There's any number of scenarios that have applied. In this instance, the district had said, in order to ensure that the stakeholder working group is given the kind of support it needs to find a viable solution that I think people are looking for, it would be unfair to do that and not say in advance whether or not there could be funds that follow. So to the best of the district's ability, they said, if this is a viable option, funds will be provided to make it possible.
100% funded from DPS, or is Strive putting money in, or?
Those details, I don't know if we know the answer to that yet, but from the district, what's that? It's a question for the board, yeah. But
Can we have Tom is here?
I want to make sure, oh, go ahead. Right, and the purpose really tonight is one of the things that we have done poorly as is communicating with our North families about what is going on. So a real strong purpose tonight is to communicate to our families who are getting this information possibly for the first time. The second piece is for us to hear all of these questions and comments, and then I think you're right on that we do need to hear some response to these, but to get everybody's questions and voices out there, we're going to plow through. They are taking notes, and then we will have them conclude with some of these answers that we would like to hear. Okay, so we had the student right here.
Hello, my name is my name is Jeremiah Attridge, and so I just want to ask, since we would have to be sharing our school with the other kids, would there be disciplinary action taken against us for speaking to the other children? I mean, I can't imagine being chastised for trying to speak to another human being. I mean, that's just, I mean, I'm not trying to be funny here in any way, I'm sorry, but it's just that, yeah, I mean, would we be chastised for commingling with other children?
I'll answer that, Jerry. No. Currently, we have a situation where we partner on different things for clubs and activities. I know our Green Club is partnering with the Strive Prep Middle School to look at building a garden. When students engage, no matter whether it's within one campus or across campuses, if it's in productive ways, then absolutely not. I would say, every time I hear this word commingling, my body cringes because I think it's a false perception that has been created due to when different schools have to work out different schedules. So for example, a certain number of students can fit in a cafeteria at a certain time, and you have to create different supervision and different sharing schedules. That's where some of this has come from, but it is not a policy, it is not a state of affairs. For example, we believe in commingling, for lack of a better word, on our athletic teams from all schools. And all of our schools are allowed to talk to each other and are not chastised for that. So when we engage in productive ways, we absolutely are doing the right thing. Okay. So next right here.
Oh,
sorry.
I thought I
That's
wasn't.
right.
Good evening, everybody, and I'll make this real short and sweet. Question. You mentioned 2 privately owned buildings, land. I just had a quick question about that piece. Are these properties currently occupied or are they vacant? And if they're occupied, who are they occupied by?
So we can't give the details of those right now, but I would say one is occupied and one is not. And so we are looking at both facilities. And until those occupiers and financial transactions can take place, then that information will come out.
Is the one that's occupied by a school or another business?
Yeah, we don't know all the details at this time, but as soon as those details come forth, then hopefully we'll have some more answers.
I thank you for your answer.
Yeah, there were 2 right here in the middle. It should have been. I don't know.
When I was a North High student, we walked out so we'd have a better education. And when we finally start making some strides, Stride's gonna come in here and take the credit? I don't think so. I'm a North High alumni, class of 1993, and if we have to walk out tonight to prove to the school board, we will. Because right now it's not fair that I have 3 kids in the Northwest pipeline and they finally have a Montessori, a dual language that we have been advocating for since I don't know when. And it was before me. People have lived and died and breathed blood and sweated so that we could be here tonight to say we are not letting Strive into this school. Sorry. North High, I think we are here to stay. This is Northside High School. It's not Strive High School. And that's all I gotta say. And I'm gonna say that I have a BA of political science with an emphasis in history. I have a Master's of Education in higher and post-secondary education from Arizona State University. And before all you microaggressive people start thinking it was an online degree, no, it was not. I'm also starting my dissertation at the University of Denver, and I'm going to be studying the social and political history of the Auraria campus. And part of that history is the pipeline from North High School. We feed Auraria campus. Our community was displaced to make room for that campus. We are not going to be displaced tonight or in the future. So take that working group. I appreciate your work. How do I get on your team? That's my question.
We are committed to not displacing anyone because we are. So we had here, and there was one, and yes, and there was one there, and there was one at the other end. Yeah. Okay. There is 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we're going to this row.
I am also a North High School alumni, and I'm very, very upset with the fact that the school board would even consider to do what you are doing with Strive High School for the simple fact my 2 daughters attended here last year when I brought my daughter from Freshman Academy, and she told me, Mom, there's middle school kids on our campus. And I thought, wow, really? Where? She says, in the old building that they remodeled. I said, really? Because when I went there, it was remodeled for us to have a science wing, brand new, so that we can experience science. So then when my other freshman came this year, and she came home, and my sophomore comes home last week, and she says, Mom, I had to write a letter to the school superintendent. They want to change the name of North High School. I about fell into tears. I contacted all my cousins, all my family that had graduated from North, and I told them, you need to come to this meeting. This is very important. It's all our children. All our children deserve what we also had, and that's to graduate and be alumni of North High School. Not to change it and say, hey, my mom went to North, she graduated from North High School, but I graduated from Strive High School. No, that's not what I sent my children to North High School for, people. I sent my children to North High School to be alumni, just like myself, of North High School. Sorry, not Strive.
One, two, and then over there, and then we're going to this row.
My name is Tyler Bausman. I have a question and an observation. It seems that if this is a default or an option for Strive to be here, it can't be a long-term solution. I'm assuming that if they're coming here, that you're already thinking forward that as Strive grows, this can't be a long-term solution. Is that correct?
Quick clarification on that. Strive's model does stop at 500, so it's not a model that grows indefinitely. It's, I think, a common misperception. No intent to take over the full North Campus. It's a model that works with no more than 500 students. So, where do we go next? You're on.
So when is this decision exactly going to be made? When is the stakeholder working group recommendations going to be presented to the board, and when will the board make a decision?
Great. That was the part of the next steps part of the evening. But on the November 29th meeting of the board is when this is up for review. In all candor, given the nature of the real estate deals, there might that will take precedence if this is kind of a viable option. But the hope is to have it wrapped up by November 29th or shortly thereafter.
And the default is set for Strive to go here, and per a letter from Mr. Boasberg to many people out in the community, there could be 500 students at Strive and 1,500 students at the North Campus. I really find it difficult for 2,000 kids to share one cafeteria when they're not allowed to be in the cafeteria at the same time. I find it difficult to believe that they can share one gym when there's numerous sporting, even gym classes. How can they share that? How will they share one athletic field? I am assuming all those Strive kids will be playing in the North Vikings, representing North. And go back to what the other person said, then they should just come to North, because they won't be able to have all the same offerings as North High School. And that is sad for the kids at Strive if they don't have the same opportunities, the same access to everything, and that's their rights, to have access to everything as a student in this Denver public school system. Because it is being paid for equally, correct? And DPS money is paying for everything for Strive High School.
They're both
correct?
public schools.
Well, that's a charter school, right? You said
But
it doesn't have boundaries, it's a charter school. So it's,
yeah, the high school doesn't have boundaries. The middle schools do. They serve students in that region. And
but we're talking about the high school right now. So my questions were, how is that really conceivable that 2,000 kids will share this campus when they're not allowed to be in the same place or in the same cafeteria? Because currently the students don't eat in the North cafeteria, right? So that's my question. How is that viable solution?
So there's no rule about who can be in the cafeteria at what time. There is a capacity limit of about 600 in the cafeteria. So if there were, let's say 1,500 students, we'd have to run 3 lunches. If there are 2,000 students, we'd have to run 4 lunches. So depending on the number, we'd go by capacity and ease of supervision. And I don't have the answers, I'm sure they can answer it later, but each charter school gets a percentage of public funds towards funding their school. Ramon, the person over there?
I do want to say we need to kick into lightning mode
Okay,
for the lightning round.
I guess I'm just a little hazy on the details of how North became the default. Like, who voted that, when did that, and all that?
Great. So we're going to, I think the superintendent wanted to have the final word so we can kick some of that question to him.
Okay, that's
great. Details about the evolution of the process. I think we're back over here for these. Yeah, the long awaited. And again, we'll get the last hands that are up and then turn it over to the superintendent.
And then while they're doing it, we're actually passing around note cards because we want to make sure that we get these questions captured, because we also need the answers to this as we make thoughtful decisions. So if you do have questions, please write them down on the note cards, because we really would like to get this information to help us weigh our decisions and things that we need to make sure we consider.
My name is Rita, and
You guys know that in 2009, they started a process that began here in North Denver. And they closed down, and in the west side, and in the east side. And they were all schools of color primarily. They closed down 8 elementary schools. We had several closed in our neighborhood, here in the Northwest Denver, Smedley, Remington, and Pueblo, you name it. They were our kids, our schools that were closed. And they told us that the reason they were closing those schools was because they were performing poorly academically and they didn't have enough kids in them. And so they promised those kids in those schools that were closed down that they were going to go to a better school and they were going to get a better education. Here is a report that was done by the Colorado Lawyers Association. And that report determined of those 8 schools that were closed, 52% of those kids in those 8 schools went to a school that was as bad academically or worse than where they were. 21% went to a school that they were not told to go to. And another 20-some percent, another 21% left the school district as a whole. Not to mention what they did to our neighborhoods when they closed those schools down. People lost property values. Who wants to move into a neighborhood that doesn't have an elementary school that's been shut down? No one does. That's what they've done to our neighborhood in the past 10 years. Don't forget what happened to Manual High School. They shut Manual High School down. They threw those kids to the wind. They never got to go back to their high school. They opened Manual High School back up. They closed it down again, and they are doing the same thing with Montbello. Keep in mind that all of these schools are composed primarily of Latinos and Black students. So my question to these folks, and I apologize to you guys, because I want to congratulate you for the hard work that you've done, and that you've been made to stand up here and be the fall guys for whatever the Board of Education is going to end up doing. And that's not right. What should have happened at the beginning of this meeting is that the superintendent, that the members of the Board of Education should have had the guts to stand up here and tell all of you and answer all of the questions that we have, as opposed to making these guys the fall guys. I am really sorry for that, and for the principal of North High School as well, because that's not their fault. And we need better. We need these guys to listen to us all, and they all need to know that we're all taxpayers, that our kids aren't just pieces of whatever that are to be thrown in the streets and to be forgotten about, and that they can't think that they can do whatever they want with this. Because you know what, guys? They've been doing that to us for the past 10 years.
And we want to make sure this does
another,
not happen again.
Somehow or another, this has to change. And being a default part of this program is not acceptable, because that is a buzzword for meaning that they will, at some point, give this school up to a charter or shut you down when they get good and tired. Thank you.
North High School is not going anywhere, and we need to make sure that we all believe that, because that is true. I'm taking 4 last, Mr. Santisteban, David, Jesus, and Billy. And then we are going to make sure it gets on your note cards, because we need to capture all these, because we want to hear from our board and from our superintendent. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Sorry. Rita, you took his spot? No.
First of all, I like your 7 criteria, and I appreciate your hard work. Secondly, my question is just, why so easily are you dismissing Horace Mann, a beautiful building, one that students could be proud of going to? You say it has inadequate parking and or something, but you say we'll buy another building. And let me say why I think it might be good. It's large, it has gyms, it has science labs, it has a lunchroom. It's not terribly far from here. The money that you would save on using the existing facility built for middle schoolers that is adequate for high schoolers would really be beneficial to all. You could move Trevista, what's left of it, to one of the other elementary schools where the urinals would fit, because that, when we were in Smedley, was the big thing about Smedley. And I don't know why that was dismissed so early. Let me wait one thing more and I'll stop. I've worked for DPS for years. I've seen fires, I've seen cold. These were two middle schools that were closed by DPS. They became a blight on the neighborhood. They reopened cold, thankfully. I don't know what, I haven't looked recently at fires, but it wasn't a good thing to close a building and let it deteriorate. And don't do that to one of our landmarks, one of our prizes from the WPA era, to just close it and let it deteriorate until it's gone. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing up the Trivista option. The stakeholder work group actually thought it was a very strong option, and we presented that to the board in September because of the secondary school facility that provided some opportunities. But just like the argument around North High School and its turnaround and respecting that turnaround process and investing in that turnaround, Trivista is in a very similar situation, and we wanted to also, and I believe that the board took that off of the table because of that similar piece to make sure that we support Trivista in that effort as well. David. Pardon? It's a secondary building. The student is an ECE 8.
Sir, I would be happy to talk to you about Trivista. I'm on the study board and would be happy to address your questions.
Okay, so
David, right here in the middle.
Okay, David.
Oh, sorry, Toby.
Toby.
I just wanted to know, the charter schools, is that a private corporation?
Depending on which charter school, there are some charter schools that are owned by, but Strive Prep is not.
That is not a private corporation, it's a public school? Okay. I think what the bigger issue is we need to support the school board candidates that support traditional schools and stop supporting the charter schools. That's the real issue. The money needs to go to North and Skinner. And all the traditional schools that are suffering because we're giving a lot of money away to all the charter schools. That's all I have to say.
David, Jesus, and Billy, and make sure you're writing your questions on the note cards.
Real quick, I've got a former North High School teacher. Got a lot of sweat equity built into this place. Really love this space. We live here. 3 kids at Valdez. And Valdez was one of the options that was presented a while back. The school board was good enough to let us know at Valdez if we didn't want that option, all we had to do was tell them no, and they would go away. So, that same thing, from my understanding, happened at Lake. Yes. That same thing, from my understanding, happened at Trey Vista. So, you know, I know it's kind of hard, but sometimes we get questions answered here. I'm going to get some in a second, but just throw of hands, who thinks the default is a bad idea? Oh. Thank you.
Yes, I do.
Meet me halfway, that would be great.
So I'm also a student at North High School. I'm a senior right now. My question is like to the board. So I'm just wondering, does the board plan on North ending up like schools like Montbello and West, or do they plan for like a different type of co-location?
I want to try to respond to that. I feel like because of this process, like everyone has talked about, that this is a unique process, we've worked really hard, that we're committed for it not to turn out like that if that's the default. And I'm going to just say it again. The default was not a decision of this group. It was set in place by the board. And so all of those questions, I think the older gentleman brought up a good question. Options were taken off the table, not by the group here. And I just have to remind the community, your guys' passion is amazing. I love hearing from these young students, but just remember, Strive students live in the same neighborhoods, okay? My children chose, my son chose to go to Strive, my daughter chose to go to North. We're not the only family in that situation. All the schools in this Northwest area, my son attended Sandoval. I chose Montessori for his elementary education. Dual language, lots of schools. Valdez is dual language. It's not about traditional versus whatever. We're in 2012. We are educated. Our children are educated in very different processes. Please, please remember that. Nobody is here to take over North. Your concerns, I'm sure, I understand those concerns as far as being taken over. And yes, please, please communicate this to the people that it needs to be communicated to. I just have to stress that again.
All right, final comment?
And so my question is actually a little bit more process. We've had a lot of people here that have a lot of good comments and a lot of good feedback and a lot of questions. But are you willing to commit tonight that before you make a decision at the Board of Education that you allow this community to have another meeting to discuss what those next pieces are? Because this community has a lot to say, or bring the school board meeting here. Because what I'm seeing is just that this community really needs to have a voice in this process, and there's some things that we can't control. So, what kind of land deal is going to happen? Where's that money going to come from? How much money is it going to cost? How long is it going to take to retrofit that building if it happens? Is it going to be up to what Strive's looking for? I mean, there are a lot of things we're looking at. And so the only thing I ask for is a continued community process of give and take, of allowing people here in the community to actually give feedback and for people to listen. I would hope more board members would come too.
Thank you. We are going to hear from our superintendent and our board members to try and address at least a few of the questions that we've had tonight. We are coming around to get the note cards to do that, but before, as they come up, I want to say we had a family so graciously donate a Kindle Fire because we believe all about reading here at North High School. And so to a student who brought their family tonight. So, Angel, do you want to pick the winner? Don't pick your own name. Let's see. It goes to McManus. Yay!
Thank you. Lots of questions, lots of comments. I'll try and do the best I can to answer them and to address them without keeping you here all night. I think it's a first step. I'd really like to thank the members of the working group. And I know this has been extraordinarily difficult and challenging decisions. I know that each one of you walked into your first discussion with the exact same level of emotion and concerns and doubts and questions that have been asked by people here tonight and have been asked by people at other community meetings. And I think that the way you guys have modeled in terms of coming together in these discussions, really trying to get to the best ideas possible, really trying to take into account the interest of all public school kids in this community has been remarkable, as well as a tremendous amount of time. So first, a really, really big thank you to all of you here. Secondly, I strongly believe that this doesn't have to be an either-or, that there's a lot of win-win here in both and that will work for all of the public school kids of this community. So I'll start from the beginning. I strongly, strongly support all three schools in question here. And I think we've seen tremendous progress at all three schools. I think the progress we're seeing at North High School in terms of academic progress and enrollment growth, the level of community support, the level of parental interest is phenomenal. I think what we've seen in this facility, with the investments that we've made in this facility, this is an absolutely beautiful facility. So strongly support the progress at North. I strongly support the progress at Strive that we've seen in the Strive schools in this region, and very strongly support the progress at Lake. I think it's instructive that we were having some of these same discussions 3 years ago. The exact same discussions around should there be Strive middle schools in Northwest Denver, should there be sharing at Lake, should there be sharing at North of the middle schools. There was a tremendous amount of community concern at that point. Frankly, there was a heck of a lot of community opposition at that point. But what has happened? Right? What has happened in the 3 years since then? I'll tell you what has happened. In the middle schools of Northwest Denver today have almost twice the number of kids than they had 3 years ago. There's 600 more families in Northwest Denver that now send their kids to middle schools here in Northwest Denver. as opposed to going out of district or someone else than did 3 years ago. We've seen tremendous performance increases at Skinner, at Lake, in the Strive middle schools. 3 or 4 years ago, all anyone would talk about was, when they talked about Northwest Denver, were concerns about middle schools, middle schools, middle schools. We don't hear that at all anymore. We now hear, very understandably, we want great high schools for our kids. That's exactly the right thing to want, but I think it's instructive that we now have very, very strong middle schools in this region that are now helping to feed in to the high schools in the region. And in terms of the facility sharing, we have facility sharings both at Lake and at North with the Strive Middle Schools. And I think by all accounts now, 3 years in, those facility sharings work quite well. Are they perfect? No. Are there frictions? Occasionally, right? But I think by all accounts, from the parents, the families, the kids, at both Strive and Lake and at North, those sharings, despite all of the fears, right, and all of the concerns 3 years ago, have not materialized. And those have proceeded well. In terms of North specifically, we are investing more in North this year than any school in the district in terms of our support for this school and our support for its improvement, and it's showing. It's showing in terms of the great academic growth, the community support, and the increased enrollment. I had the chance last week to sit down for an hour with about 20 or 30 North students in a leadership class to talk about their feelings and try and answer their questions. And I thought that was a very helpful and instructive opportunity to hear their views and their concerns and have that discussion. I think it's fair to say they have very legitimate concerns, and I think understandably so. It's also fair to say when you ask about, well, how for the last 3 years has the facility sharing with Strive been, and the answer is really okay. And there were a couple complaints that during hot days at recess, when windows were open, they could hear the Strive kids outside at recess. But basically the answer was not a particularly big deal. And I think that's an important thing is, again, Strive has had a school here for 3 years in the separate 1913 building. And again, that facility sharing generally has worked well, as has the facility sharing, again, at Lake. Secondly, I will say that, and I'll be very, very clear, every student in Northwest Denver who wishes to come to North High School next year, the year after, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, will have a place at North High School. And the board resolution in June made clear 2 things. One, that Strive will not be sharing the academic facilities here in the main building at North. They will continue to use the 1913 building at North. Should Strive grow to a size that 1913 building is not able to hold them all, we would expand that 1913 building or build adjacent to it. But every student in this area who today or in the future wants to come to North High School will have that opportunity to do so. In terms of space, this high school, this campus, including the 1913 building, is about the same size as East High School. East High School today has 2,300 kids. North High School today has about 950 kids. There is plenty of room for this high school to expand, and we will support that expansion. We're also clear that So thank you. So happy to address that question. I'm happy to address it. There's my sentence, please. So again, the board resolution also made clear that should North High School grow to a size that it cannot comfortably share space with Strive High School, then we will work to find another location for Strive. That's true whether it's a middle school or high school. So again, state that clearly. Should North High School grow to a size that it cannot share space reasonably with Strive, we will find another space for Strive. Okay? So in terms of the numbers of students, again, right now this area of Northwest Denver has 1/3 fewer elementary school students than it had 10 years ago. Okay? So there is, again, it is nice to see again the increase in enrollment. I think it's tremendous to see the increase in enrollment. But this area has 1/3 fewer elementary school kids than it did 10 years ago. So the notion that there's not going to be room at North High School again, I think is unlikely. But should North continue to thrive and continue to grow, which it will, and grow to a space that it cannot share space with Strive, then we will find a new location for Strive. I'll also say a couple other thoughts, and again, answers to some of these questions. Again, there are now 40 schools in Denver, 40 schools that share campuses. It is not, in each case, there are definitely concerns raised and questions raised, and legitimately so, but I think it is overwhelmingly the case that those campus sharings, as has been the case here at North and here at Lake, generally work out positively, and is very much the case at Montbello. If anyone would like to go on a tour to Montbello, they will see how that space sharing is working, and they will see the dramatic increases in enrollment and the dramatic increases in student performance at Montbello. And this is the first year at West, and I'm confident to see the same questions at West. I want to address the question, if I could, of the professor who raised the question about healing. And I thought it was an incredibly thoughtful and important question. I think there was one reason I had the opportunity to have the discussion with the students at North last week. So I do think it is incredibly important that we do take time to come together as a community, to celebrate what we have in common, and to take the time to heal and move forward. And I think that has been the case, again, in the other 40 facility sharings that we've seen throughout the district. And I think it goes to the bottom, is as a community, are we going again to draw lines between us and have this, I'm part of this group or this community or that community, this race or that race, this neighborhood or that neighborhood, or try and come together again in what binds us together as a community. So I know we're over time. I get that sense clearly, people walking with their feet. So I'm happy to stay around afterwards, and I know there are a few further questions I'm happy to answer afterwards, but I also want to respect people's time.
My name is Happy Haynes. I'm an at-large member of the board, and thank you all for hanging in here for so long. And ditto to everything that's been said about the working group. So we are here to listen. Many of us have been listening and meeting with a lot of folks in the community over the weeks and months. I've had an opportunity to meet with some students here at North. I would love to do that again. I think student voice is very important, and we have heard the issues that the students here have raised, and I think everyone on this working committee is aware of those issues as well, and I think are struggling with the same things. There's just one thing that I think is important for you to understand about this process, and that is in June, when the board passed the first resolution looking at the potential co-location at North, after a lot of community input and hearing many of the same issues and knowing that it was a difficult decision, we were approached by people from the community because we were concerned about the polarization, the sort of us versus them. And people from this community came to us and said, we all live in the community and we don't want to be at odds with you. We don't want this division. So give us some time as community, as Northwest community members, and let us see if we can come up with some solutions that work for all of us. And with the themes or with the understandings or agreements that were shared with you earlier. The first and I think most important one that underlies all of the discussion and all of the work of this group and the very fervent desire of our Board of Education is that we want what's best for all of the kids. Not one group versus another, but an opportunity for every family and every student to get their needs met in their neighborhood in Northwest Denver. So I think that is what we're all striving to accomplish. It's certainly what the working group has done. And I think the board's position was, they asked us to step back, essentially. And we agreed to hold our decision in abeyance and to step back and let members of the community in Northwest Denver come together, struggle with the issues, with a goal in mind of serving all kids, and see if they could come up with some alternatives and some ways, some solutions that were win-win and not win-lose. And so that's where we are today. We don't have answers to everything, and part of it is because we agreed to step back and give this community an opportunity to work together in unity. And I think, I agree with you, Tom. I thought the question about the students, particularly, but I think the healing for this whole community. Nobody likes the sense that we're pitted one against the other. When everyone here, and I believe strongly that everyone here tonight, whether we agree or not, is here because they care about the kids and they want what's best for the kids. I don't question that for anyone here tonight. And so I hope that this process, that the stakeholder group is engaging in, is part of that healing process. And I know they've said they want that student voice. We all do, and we will, in answer to the question about will we continue this communication and this dialogue, absolutely we will, until this decision is made and beyond. And more importantly, how will we make it work for everyone?
I'm Jeannie Kaplan. I'm on the school board. I represent District 3, Central Denver, but I actually think that all of us represent all of our kids. And I just want to say, this is a process that really is about community. And I don't know that we've paid enough attention to the community. And there is a history here that really needs to be honored. None of us, I appreciate what Tom says about co-locations. We do have co-locations that work well. And part of the reason they work well is because they're community-driven co-locations. And or the buildings are made for such an event, like the Evidentis campus. Where this situation has arisen, it hasn't really been an easy process. And I hope that going forward, one of the things we learned from you all is that we need to do this kind of outreach before we make a decision. Because maybe really divides the community totally unnecessarily. I don't think there's any one of us here who would not want all of us to have a kumbaya moment. I really mean that. We are all here for the same reason, and our kids are here to get educated, and we can't lose sight of that. Again, I would hope that the next time a situation like this occurs, we do this kind of outreach first, come to a conclusion. The stakeholder work group has spent untold hours trying to figure this out. They're now at a point where it seems to me we have a choice, you have a choice, ultimately we have the choice, and I welcome making that decision. That's our responsibility. We have been elected to make these decisions. I mean, one of the hard choices I think going forward will be whether this is a district that wants to buy another facility for a school and or whether you all want to have a co-located high school here. And so I would say that's a decision that we as a community have to somehow figure out going forward. That's all I want to say. I also do want to recognize my colleague Arturo Jimenez, who is here, who represents your district. And so he came in a little late. But if there's a way to heal, we all need to figure that out, because obviously I think that nerves and feelings are still rather raw, and it's not for lack of trying, is what I say.
All right, so just a quick word of closing. Hopefully you have. I know we didn't get every question answered, but I see a number of note cards. We do want to collect those and get back to you. I get just one quick word to my fellow stakeholder working group members. I feel like we had aspired tonight to kind of set the tone of our working agreements, in which it was perfectly safe to kind of advocate for your interest without needing to disparage in other groups. I think I made a quick decision that the kind of tone needed to come out. There's clearly a lot of anger and frustration people had. So to those folks that felt like you had to just get hit by a barrage of frustration, whether it's district personnel or Strive folks, I'll take some responsibility for that. But clearly, to Jeannie's point, the depth of passion and conviction in the North community and the concerns over this issue needed to be kind of unveiled and brought forth. I'm hoping that our next steps forward, including the proposals that are still on the table, that we sincerely hope might come to pass and that would allow us to get through this stage of the history. People stay at the table for the next stage where people can work together across those differences. So that's at least our hope and our commitment in the short period of time we have left, hopefully with the stakeholder working group, is to deliver a solution that can work for everybody and to take those concerns that you've expressed tonight into account. We'll communicate as best we can. Hopefully you signed in to stay involved on the email list and to stay involved with your own individual school's communication. Thank you to everyone that came tonight and for the hard work it's taken to get us here, and we look forward to staying in touch for the next couple weeks.